Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, and I'm hitting my go live on Instagram as well over there. We're going live there. Awesome. So I'm glad to be back in the studio and back in my office to chat with you on the last Wednesday of March. And it is not only is it Black History Month, it's Heart Health Month, it's National Weddings Month. And while she's not a wedding planner, Zöe planned her own wedding. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to Zöe Slaughter, who is the founder of Invisibly Allergic. She's a blogger and an advocate for food allergies. And she actually has a severe allergy to peanuts or to nuts. And actually, Zöe, I want you to clarify everything off of your allergens so people can understand what you're doing, and then we're going to dive into how you planned your wedding. But welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tracy. You did a great introduction. I am peanut allergic in terms of being anaphylaxis only, but I do have a number of food intolerances as well that cause like inflammation and things like that in my body that aren't fun. But yeah, peanut allergic only.
So how long have you had your peanut allergy?
So I discovered that I was allergic to peanuts at the age of 2, and I was born with eczema in the 90s during a time when if you were born with eczema, the protocol in the medical field was like, avoid peanuts strictly. So I'd never had peanuts. And then my dad accidentally gave me a peanut butter cookie when I was 2. And that's when I found out I had the peanut allergy, and I've navigated having a peanut allergy ever since.
Well, and at that age, your parents are navigating it for you. And
Yes.
When did you start really advocating for yourself? And actually, ironically, yesterday I was in a doctor's office and there was a video from FAIR, and it was talking about there was a couple of different videos interviewing parents and how they've taught their kids how to advocate for themselves and read the labels. So how old were you when you started doing that?
Yeah, I was little. I remember advocating for myself when I was in preschool and being like, I didn't have the full understanding of what an allergy even was or what peanuts even were, but I was like, I knew I was allergic. I knew I wasn't supposed to have it. If I smelled it, I was like, emergency. I was well trained by my parents to tell everyone, like, if you know anything about me, you should know that I have an anaphylactic peanut allergy and I have medicine. So I've been used to it. And over the years, I would say like early high school years, like teens going into my early 20s, I started noticing that I was having more allergic reactions, and I could tell that my allergy was evolving. I started having airborne reactions and it was just like I was experiencing things that I hadn't fully experienced before, or maybe I wasn't as aware of. So my allergies kind of changed over time and gotten worse, unfortunately, with age. But my wisdom and my knowledge has gotten larger. So that's one good thing.
Yeah, that's a very good thing. Hey, our friend Martha, Allergy Dragon, is listening to us on Instagram. And we also have Chef Fly who joined. And so hello.
Hello.
Please ask us any questions. If anybody's got questions, please ask them in the chat on both sides, whatever platform you're listening to, and we will actually address them here. So that's kind of very, I want to say telling or whatever, but your allergies have gotten worse as you've aged. But I love the fact that you said your knowledge has gotten stronger, because it's a very big challenge in managing food allergies across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've gotten empowered. I used to be felt isolated around it and hesitant to tell people about it, just kind of embarrassed. And now I'm a lot more confident when speaking about my food allergy. So, there's pros and cons to it. But, and the food allergy field has changed a lot as well. I mean, just the words cross contact were never, in my vocabulary until more recently.
Right. Yeah, it was cross-contamination, and it's more of that cross-contact. So actually, let's just define those two things. Can you explain what cross-contact and what cross-contamination is?
Yeah. So cross-contact, from what I know, is used more when it comes to food allergens or any type of particle contaminating something else. So if, a sponge in the kitchen is used to clean a peanut butter knife and then used to clean a plate. It's a good example of cross contact with food allergens, whereas cross contamination, I think people are getting away from using that since it's typically more around germs and not so much like food allergen particles. That's always been my understanding when it's been explained.
That's a really good simplistic way to look at it. Yes, that's a good way. So how long, so you've had your peanut allergy since you were 2 and it's gotten worse over the years. What prompted you and when did you start your blog, Invisibly Allergic?
Yeah, so I definitely felt like I wanted to do a blog or share my story. I felt really isolated, like I said, like in my early 20s. There really wasn't Instagram and Facebook groups and as much allergy like advocacy content as there is now. And so I was searching on Google, like, is there anyone else out there like me? And I wasn't finding anything. And so I met my husband and he was like, you should share your experience. I think people would want to know about it. And I was like, really? Like, okay. So I started Invisibly Allergic at the beginning of 2017. And it was really like a time where things were changing. Like I did start seeing more conversations around food allergies a couple years after I started my blog and people were writing me when I first started it. So yeah, 2017 is when I first started it.
Okay. And you, on your blog, you talk about, your position here is to educate people. And I love the fact that you're educating individuals with food allergies and without food allergies. And I want to get into that. But you're really also, it's not just about the awareness, but it's the advocacy that comes around it. So can you let's touch on first why you're educating people who don't have food allergies. Why is that
Yeah.
important?
Totally. So when it comes to someone having a food allergy, it's not an experience that one person deals with on their own. It impacts family, friends, the employer, like we're going to be getting into events, things like that. So it's something that you do have to tell people about to be able to get an accommodation. So that's why I love just spreading the message to anyone who wants to hear it and is interested. I think it's important to hear other perspectives outside of your own. And that's something that's really important to me is like, I've always tried to seek out experiences outside of my own personal experience just to educate myself on what others are going through. So there's other people out there who don't know anyone with a food allergy, but are empathetic and want to learn more. And I love that. So I definitely don't say, if you have a food allergy, look at my website. If you don't need to look at it because the content is, applicable to really everybody.
That's a really good point. And Tay just piped in. Thank you for that. Because I really do think that it's important. And I was chatting with somebody earlier who is recently I'm chatting with their spouse and their spouse is going gluten-free and asking, well, how do I know, what I can and can't eat? And she's like, well, if you're reading the labels, the top 8 allergens should be listed there. And then, all these things. And he's like, wow, and didn't realize it. And I said, you don't know what you don't know.
Right. Totally.
So I'm really glad that you're putting that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, anyone with a dietary restriction of any sort deserves to know what's in the food. And so whether it's anaphylaxis or not, a lot of people are curious about that kind of thing. So it applies to so many people.
It does. So I want to get into the advocacy part too, but I do want to, because it is wedding month and that's what I pitched this on. I really want to talk about how you advocated for yourself in planning your wedding. And everybody know that her wedding was 7 years ago. Is that right?
I think it was actually 8 or 9, 2016. I'm so bad with math.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I'm bad at math as well. So we're just 8 or 9 years ago. So because you can think about it as, and you and I were chatting before we started a couple of weeks ago about this. I'm like, it's not just about the caterer. So I wanted you to talk about how you worked, how you found your caterer and what that process was and why you ended up that way, but then talking about the other vendors.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, looking back on my wedding planning experience, I feel like I got really lucky. Like things just kind of worked out and, maybe I'm making it more simple than it was when I was in it because I do remember it being stressful. But looking back, I'm like, oh, wow, I got pretty lucky in the city that I'm in that there were a lot of people willing to accommodate and knowledgeable. But so once I got engaged, I was like, I've got to find and lock down a wedding venue because so many venues I knew required specific caterers, and I wasn't comfortable with eating with a caterer that used peanuts. And so I had messaged a lot of places asking, do you have peanuts in the kitchen? And all of them did. They were very open to making accommodations for me around, like, we can have a dedicated area. But I was like, I want to see what else is out there first. And because that could be a good plan B. But what else is out there? And so my mom's friend and neighbor, Patty McCormick, she's no longer in the food allergy, or not food allergy, but food catering space. But she was a food caterer. She had her own business in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I live. And she had like 30 plus years of, food safety knowledge under her belt. So my mom connected me with her, and we met, and we kind of talked through, like, this is what I'm wanting to have happen. I found a venue that doesn't require any specific caterer. It can be whoever I want.
Okay.
And so she was like, I'm willing to do this. Tell me the brands that you are comfortable with. So I shared a document of all the brands that I trust, that I know didn't use peanuts in the facility, because that's the way that I eat. And we did a taco bar. So I never would have thought of doing like a taco or burrito bar, but she helped me navigate that, and everything that was at our wedding was safe for me to eat. So that way I didn't have to think about, like, on the day of, like, oh, I need to use these tortillas instead of these other tortillas, or this salsa instead of this one. So she helped me so much in that way. And then in terms of bartenders, there was a company, I think it's called Cherry Red Studios or Cherry Red Events. I think it's Cherry Red Events in Louisville. And they do basically whatever you want in terms of bartending and alcohol. So they provided the alcohol license, and then I provided them with all of the alcohol that I felt comfortable with. And so it really was kind of piecing it all together in terms of caterers. I worked with those two.
Okay. And so Allergy Dragon, our friend Chef Martha, asked, what was the most difficult to plan for the wedding? Do you find that food was the most difficult part?
It's a good question. I want to say finding the venue was probably the most difficult, because so many of them required specific caterers and you have to use this place for the desserts for your cake, and you have to do rentals through this company. So once I found the event space, I felt like everything was able to kind of like fall into place a little bit easier. So I did the majority of my wedding research around the venue first, locked in my date, and then I felt like, okay, I can breathe a little bit, and I can find those caterers later.
Well, and I think that's important to note, because as you said, I mean, some venues require specific caterers. So you actually then you're finding the venue, and then you have to go filter those 5, 6, 10 different caterers to even see if they work.
Yeah.
So that's like 10 times the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. I remember.
And there was something else, though, that you shared with me before we started, about another vendor that you were like, okay, he eats peanuts on the job. And I think it was the place that you worked. Is that right? The floral.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I was like, ooh, this has happened at multiple employers. But I worked at a florist when I was getting married. So I was in a good position in terms of getting my florals taken care of, or like, at least I got a discount, and I knew I did my own floral arrangements. But when I first started working at the florist, the person who was processing the flowers, so like cutting the thorns off of stems and counting the flowers, dividing up by color, different things like that, checking quality. He was eating peanuts that was like his go-to snack. And so I was getting these processed flowers to me, and I'm like, I'm having, hives, allergic reactions. I'm not feeling well. My lip is swelling. And so it was a process of elimination for me to figure out, okay, it's this, one guy who's been there for like 40 years who's doing the flower processing. And so, it just shows you that aspects of your wedding can be impacted by peanuts in ways that you don't expect, because I was literally allergic to the the flowers.
Wow.
So he stopped eating peanuts. Yeah, sorry.
For not forever, just for your to process your wedding, or for forever?
Forever. So he,
Did
because I
he?
worked there, he was like, what can I eat that's similar? And so I was like, I can have other tree nuts, but if they're cooked in peanut oil, that could still be a problem. So I talked to him, and luckily he was really accommodating and nice. And so he just switched over his snacks for me while I worked there.
Wow, that's really nice. And
Yeah.
it wasn't a mandate from above. It was, you just had a conversation, and yeah, that's pretty cool. Awesome. So what from that whole thing, what advice do you give other people who have food allergies or other dietary restrictions in planning their weddings? And I know you've got some information on your website, so can you share some other insight?
Yeah. I do have an article on invisiblyallergic.com that kind of goes through how I navigated my wedding and everything. So feel free to check that out, of course. But in terms of advice, I would say it took me a long time to feel like I could just ask for what I wanted. And I know it sounds so simple, but I think it's common in the food allergy community where people do feel like they don't want to be a burden, and you don't want to be, so different in a way where you're needing these accommodations that they've never heard of and stuff. But I feel like once I laid out what I needed for my wedding to happen and for me to be comfortable at it, because ultimately I didn't want to have an allergic reaction at my wedding. That was the thing I did not want to have happen.
Right.
So I was like, it's my wedding. I deserve to not have an allergic reaction at it. There's not going to be any peanuts there. And I was like, of course there's that tiny % chance of like something weird could happen. And I guess it could happen. But I wanted to take any precautions into place that I could just to try to make it not be the case and to enjoy my wedding day. So that's ultimately what happened. And it was just because I think really Patty, who I was working with the catering, she was like, no, tell me, what do you want? Like, don't tell me, oh, if I could have this, if I could have that. She's like, what would be the best case scenario? And let's go with that. So that was really helpful for me to just say what I wanted and what I needed ultimately.
Well, and I think that's really important for any caterer to realize too, is like you're coming to them with this opportunity. It does make some changes necessary, but I like her philosophy. What do you want? Right. And then let's make that happen. So I think that's really important for people to understand, and finding that vendor you can work with that will do that.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I know. I feel lucky because it was my mom's neighbor and friend. So I was like, I didn't have to do a big long hunt to try to find someone who
Right.
was accommodating. I got, the first person I talked to was the one I went with.
But and talking to the other caterers that you did talk to at first, you found them to be wanting to be accommodating, or
I
what were
did.
your challenges with that? Okay.
Yeah, I did find them wanting to be accommodating, but they weren't accommodating to the way that I wanted them to be. So they were like,
Okay.
here's what we do when it comes to someone having a food allergy. We have a dedicated space, and then we wash everything, and we use different, towels and sponges. And I was like, okay, I might be okay with that if I can't find someone else who, will do the catering for me, if I can find a venue
Right.
that doesn't require these, catering companies. So it wasn't
Mhm.
that they said, no, we can't help you. But I didn't want that. Ultimately, I was like, ugh, it kind of leaves room for me to have a reaction, it felt like. So yeah, that's true. I did work with the first caterer once I found a venue. So getting to that point of finding the venue that didn't require a specific caterer was the
Yeah.
hardest part.
And when you're looking at your other vendors like linens and things like that, did you ask questions about allergens?
So actually, it was interesting. So with linens, I provided the linens myself.
Okay.
And it was just something that I didn't have a huge wedding. And so my mother-in-law had a lot of things. She actually used to work in catering. And so we had a lot of those things already. When it came to the
Okay.
chairs and the tables, we did have to go through those. And I wiped all of them down with the wet wipes that I typically use. But I didn't have to worry about linens. In terms of the silverware, Patty handled that, and she got fresh silverware. And she was like, that's totally fine. I'm sure I'll use it again. And so I did bring some utensils and things from home. It was kind of like everyone, I was like, I already have these things. So since I was working directly with Patty, who had her own catering business, we were able to say like, yeah, let's just use that, pot from your house or that spatula from your house. So there was a lot of conversations that happened around it, but linens we did provide ourselves.
Okay, awesome. How did you, I'm just out of curiosity, was there anyone else in attendance that had a food allergy or other dietary need?
Yeah, so I had one friend who had a tree nut allergy, and so I talked to her beforehand, and then we also had a family member who is in a wheelchair, and so I had to make sure that it was accessible for wheelchair users. And those are the only two that I recall. I remember, when I sent out my invites, I'm like, obviously I know everybody who I'm sending these to, but and so I knew that I told the person with the tree nut allergy, like, hey, I'm not going to have, anything with tree nuts unless, what are you comfortable with? And we had that discussion. And then same with the person who was in the wheelchair. I was like, I want to make sure you're comfortable getting around. You can access the bathrooms. Is there anything else I should know? And so really it was me and then two other people who I was kind of keeping in the back of my mind at all times.
Awesome. Well, no, and I'm sure they appreciated those conversations too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I feel like they had said that, and I kind of got ahead of it. I was like, okay, I think I know.
So. Okay, so I think planning your wedding and having food allergy now for 2 decades plus, right? What has made you an advocate? What makes you passionate about this besides not wanting to die? How has your and what are you doing to advocate for safe dining experiences at weddings and elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, so I really felt like my food allergy was out of control when I was in my mid-20s because I didn't understand labeling laws in the US. And so once I understood that, maybe something on the ingredients panel of a product might not say peanuts, it might have been made on shared equipment or be in a same facility. So once I got that knowledge, I felt a lot more empowered and like I can be like an advocate for others because I have this like, I kind of cracked the code. I was like, okay, I'm having a lot fewer allergic reactions now that I avoid products that are on shared equipment, in the same facility. So in terms of safe dining experiences, like, and just people with food allergies in general, trying to be an advocate is the way I see it through food labeling policy. And I don't have a policy background, but I like to surround myself with people who do and who are passionate about seeing changes in the labeling space. Because to me, I think a lot can be done with restaurants and dining out and events. But if the ingredients panel doesn't say if it may contain accurately, there's only so much that a dining, chef or someone can ultimately do without looking into those facilities themselves. So my hope is that, the labeling laws will continue to get better and better in the US and that we can get more transparency around what is in the facility, what's on shared equipment, and then people with food allergies can make those educated informed decisions for themselves and have more transparent conversations with restaurants.
Well, and I'm tagging you on LinkedIn to Betsy Craig, who works with a lot of she's got a company called Menu Trinfo, doing a lot of the labeling legislation. So,
oh, thank you. Yes, I think she's partnering with FAIR, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Soon. Yes, okay, cool. Yes. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I just tagged you on LinkedIn on that. So, or yes, both of you on that. So yeah, I mean, it is really important and for people to understand that we do have the Food Allergy Labeling and Consumer Protection Act from 2014 that requires the prepackaged food to be labeled with the top 8 allergens. And then in 2021, sesame was added to that list. So sesame has to be labeled on prepackaged foods in the United States. So that is that. But I know the food code was changed in December of 2022 to say that unpackaged food should be labeled, but it's not mandatory at this point. So, like at events and weddings, it's not mandatory, but it's recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah. and
Yeah.
appreciated, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I know. I have had such good dining experiences and event experiences, but it always comes down to if they want to accommodate or not. And so I would love to see it be more mandatory and be more like factual, like this is what I know is in the same facility. And so then they can communicate that with me. And, even if they don't want to accommodate as much or something, they at least have that knowledge and information at their fingertips because the manufacturers and the brands are required to give it.
Right. So from a catering perspective and as a person with food allergies, what would you like to see, and what kind of information would you like to see from food service providers outside of prepackaged manufacturers?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I know it sounds like a big ask, but I don't eat food products that are in the same facility as peanuts just because I've had so many allergic reactions that way. So that's what would apply to cater to. If they're using peanuts, then I usually don't go with them unless there is some alternative that they offer that, makes sense to me. Like maybe they use my kitchen or my mother-in-law's kitchen, or, I don't know. I feel like there's always,
Mhm.
when it comes to accommodations, it's kind of like it could be anything. So
Mhm.
my number one is that I don't want peanuts in the same space. So
Gotcha.
yeah, that's my ask.
Yeah, and for a catered function, that's yeah, in the same space, because especially then cooking it, like you're sautéing peanut sauce, right? So is
Exactly.
yours is airborne in that cooking process as well as the salts and stuff from peanuts, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So any I mean, it's one of those things where I can have an allergic reaction without food and eating even really being involved because I can touch a surface and then touch my lip. And, maybe I just touched a handle at the library or a library book or something, and it can ignite a full on reaction. So, um, for me, I think about that in all ways with eating and without eating. I know I can have a reaction either way. But if there's peanuts in
Right.
the kitchen, I just, from my personal experience, I know how easy cross contact can happen with different, surfaces,
Yep.
and how often do you use peanuts, or when's the last time you used peanuts? Like all of those things get factored in for me to see if I'm
Hmm.
comfortable or not.
Right. Yep. All right. So Tay just put a comment in here on LinkedIn. Thanks for being cognizant of your guest needs. Awesome. The CEO's wife from a previous employer had celiac, which progressively worsened. Um, Requested a list of things could not eat, and I had one meeting for her. She was apologetic. Caterers like to be accommodating, but don't have the sensitivity and importance of allergens. As such, don't follow through on everything. Tay, I think that's really, really, really true. And when I was at a site visit recently, and the catering manager said to me, "Well, you're the first meeting planner that's gone to the detail that you do on allergens." And I'm like, "You should be doing it yourself," you know? Yeah,
Right.
I mean, you don't want, like you said, you don't want to die at your wedding. I'm like, I don't want you to die. I don't want anybody to die at my event. And actually, at this event coming up, we do have somebody that's anaphylactic to tree nuts and peanuts. So I'm telling them, and you know, we've got all the meeting space. So I'm going to
Collaborating.
say, hey, in your convention kitchen, please don't use peanuts or tree nuts at all through the whole week. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah.
but I think
Yeah.
it's definitely something to think about. Um, And I mean, so when you go to an event, are you bringing your own food for the most part, or are you conversing with the meeting planner? What are you doing?
Usually I do bring my own food. Typically I will converse with the planner first because in the past they have accommodated me by not, using any peanut products, but then also they would order food from a place that I eat at that I feel comfortable with that I know, isn't using peanuts in their kitchen. So I've either brought my own food or I've had them order food for me. But it's gone both ways. When they order for me, I'm like, I want you to please put in the order, that I have a peanut allergy. Like I still want to go through like a
Right.
couple of steps just to make sure that I still feel
Hmm.
comfortable. But since it's coming from a place that I eat at regularly, I feel, comfortable with it. I try to not
Right.
bring my own food if that's an option, but otherwise I'll just usually kind of ask like, what is on the menu, and then I'll bring something similar for myself so I don't feel like left out. That's been a way that
Yeah.
I've felt like, like I'm not really missing out because I have this meal for myself already that's very similar.
Right.
So,
Okay, well, no, that's good to know because I like the idea of finding. I mean, it's similar to kosher, finding that place that can doesn't have peanuts in the facility at all, and ordering you a meal from that. That's actually a really good option. Um,
yeah,
and where's the database of that? You know, that listing,
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but okay, so I'm going to bring up a touchy subject. It was a new subject. I mean, and I haven't touched on it yet in any of my blogs or anything, just for personal reasons. Um, but the young lady that passed away last month, she was the dancer in New York, and and she bought cookies at a grocery store that were labeled with allergens but didn't say they contained peanuts. And but she has a peanut allergy, and she did end up passing away from that. And it comes down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, the place at the grocery store ordered the cookies from, updated the food, updated their ingredients, but didn't include that, or and it's all going to come out, how it is. But now it's a fight between the grocery store and that manufacturer of those cookies. And it wasn't like a manufacturer of prepackaged food that we buy on the shelves on a daily
Right.
basis. It's a bakery item. Um, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, that's a very open-ended question, but where do you stand on that? And how does that, because it's definitely a miscommunication, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was angry and really sad for her and her family. I think her name was Orla Baxendale. The first thing I thought was that I saw she was British, from the UK. And I was like, "Ugh," the labeling laws in the UK I know are different. And so I could see how, that could happen, where you would look at the label and you would trust it. And
Right.
so that was my first thought. Then I, read more about it. I realized that it was an actual true mislabeling of a product, where it would probably eventually have led in a recall, and a lawsuit, for sure. But it's one of those things where it's like, our lives, my life and others' lives who have anaphylactic allergies, are in the hands of these manufacturers, other people a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And I thought it was awful because, it was a true mislabel. It should have said contains peanuts, and it did not. So I know for me, I'm really sensitive to smell. And so, like, in that case, I wonder if she was sensitive to smell, or is that just a me thing? Like, I don't really meet a lot of other people who are anaphylactic to peanut, to have these kinds of conversations with. And so it just broke my heart. And I really just am upset that that happened. I will say, because of things like this, I've had allergic reactions to products that have been recalled in the past. And this is not something super recent, but in maybe like 7 years ago or something was the last time that this happened. But that's one reason why I stopped eating allergens. I look into what allergens are in the facility, because it has lessened the amount of reactions I've had because of later on recalls happening. But it doesn't mean
Right.
that it can't happen, because I've seen recalls for the flour that's used in the ingredients. It's like you can never fully avoid it,
Yeah.
but very
Yeah.
upsetting.
Very, very upsetting. And then to add to that, a doctor just died this week, in Orlando, having communicated her food allergies to a restaurant,
Hmm.
um, and sharing that she was nut, and I'm pulling it up really quickly,
Was it dairy
nuts
and
and dairy, yes, and had
yeah.
clearly communicated multiple times.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I think it's really shaken the food allergy community, because it happened at
Hmm.
Disney, and Disney is known for being really accommodating with food allergies. And so I think it
Hmm.
is going to raise, awareness that we do need stricter labeling laws. Maybe, people are trying their best, but is it required? And where did it go wrong? I don't know how that happened with her communicating it. I think that they have many
Hmm.
policies in place that should have, but I don't know if they just pulled a wrong dish or what.
Hmm.
But yeah, so sad to see, especially at a place like Disney, where I imagine a lot of people are now afraid to eat there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a restaurant in Disney Springs, not on Disney World property, but yeah, on and I say
Under
that
the Disney
loosely, but
umbrella or
right,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And it may be, I don't know if that's a Disney owned restaurant or they just lease the space. So that's a whole nother thing
Oh.
to think about too.
I wonder, from what I've
Be-
heard, I
yeah.
thought it was
Hmm.
Disney owned just because other
Right.
people in Orlando who I know who eat there have said
Hmm.
that they eat there all the time.
Right.
And
Okay.
so I assume it's Disney, but that's true. I haven't heard as much, and I assume more will continue to come out around the story of the doctor from a Long Island, just like it has with
Right.
Orla. Like I feel like
Hmm.
more details will
Right.
continue to come out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'll find out that I'm not going to go dig for that right now. But yeah, it
Yeah.
is, and that's really kind of important to know too, because if you're at a restaurant that's on a hotel property or whatever, some of those are not owned by the hotels. They're
Mhm.
leased. So
Yes.
you're, I mean, but it is leased on that property. So
It's
it's who
confusing.
owns it is very, very confusing. And what are their policies, right? Because you
Mhm.
may have policies that are in the hotel, but do those
Mhm.
policies, allergy policies, relate to, are they put down onto, shared with and required of the restaurants that are on those properties?
Yeah, and that's one
Yeah.
reason why, and it's a lot of work on my end, and I don't always get a response, but I do
Hmm.
reach out to restaurants or hotel restaurants, event spaces, hotels in general, any place like that.
Right.
And I'll ask those kinds of questions like, do you use peanuts? Does your restaurant, or is it owned by the same? Could I dine there potentially? I like to
Right.
ask those kinds of questions, but there are times that I haven't, and it's really hard. Things will change between me emailing and what their
Hmm.
practices
Oh
are.
yeah.
So it's not
Hmm.
a guarantee.
Well, and it's even like the story with Orla, like the manufacturer changed their recipe.
Yeah.
So it is a constant update of understanding and reading labels. So, as a person, you're always reading the labels no matter what, because you don't know if XYZ brand changed the ingredients of it.
Hmm.
And you need to really pay attention to those things.
Yeah, and I will say, like, even though I mean I'm 34 and I've had this allergy my whole life, since I could read labels, and I have trusted a brand many times where I've bought it and been like, oh yeah, I know this brand is safe, and I didn't read the label, and it was still safe, but I caught myself being like, wait a second, I'm just going based off of prior historical knowledge of the ingredients panel. And so it happens. I try to check
Hmm.
labels like 3 times, once in the store, once at home, and once before I eat it. But I've also caught myself in that situation before. So no one's perfect. It's like, I'm learning as I go, just like everyone else is. It's not
Right.
like there's a
Yeah.
guidebook for this.
Right. Exactly. Well, and then I know an allergist who years ago said her son who had a tree nut allergy had an allergic reaction in their house because failed to read that the pesto contained tree nuts,
Oh,
right? And whoever served that to her son didn't think to look. And so it is just a constant diligence of that, which is stressful and
yeah, it
time
is.
consuming.
It is. Yeah, it's stressful. It's time consuming. It's like something that you're constantly it kind of puts you in an anxious state. Like I feel like I'm just
Hmm.
having to be hyper focused, and yeah, it's not an easy way to go about, but it's the only option. So I try not to get
Yeah.
too down on it, and just try to say to myself, everyone deals with different things, and this is what I
Hmm.
deal with, is my food allergy. So yeah, I just hope that other people are kind, and I try to be aware of what other accommodations people need as well outside of food allergies.
Yeah. Yep. So we talked about your advocacy work, and then there's a couple of other things on your website that you're really passionate about, and universal health care and pricing of the medicine pricing. Can you talk about a little bit about both of those and why you're passionate about those?
Yeah, totally. I am of the belief that like healthcare is a human right. We all have health, so I feel like it needs to be equitable. And so that's really the same in terms of like medication pricing,
Hmm.
being able to go to the doctor, being able to get healthcare. And so that's a huge, I don't want to say I guess, preference of mine to advocate for, because I do think it's just so basic and important. And so if that foundational is there, it can make living with a food allergy, living with another type of disability, so much easier and so much more equitable for everyone. So that is something that you'll see on my website is, I am for universal health care. That encompasses medications being affordable for everyone. And unfortunately, food is kind of similar. Like food allergy brands and brands that are more allergy friendly tend to be 3, 4, 5 times more expensive. And it makes sense why it is. But I'm hopeful that if allergy transparency happens within laws, more brands will be able to be available to people and more affordable. And it will cause less reactions, less needing to go to the hospital, and it just less medications needed. It kind of all affects one another. So that's my viewpoint on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is, the price of it is astronomical when you're looking at some of those things, and those are the only things that you're able to buy. And especially if you have a low income, or on WIC or other programs, and that those options are not necessarily available for you based on the WIC programming. So I know there's work being done on that too. You said something in there. I was so excited. I actually met with the security officer of a hotel that I'm producing an event at. And I'm like, okay, well, what about food out? What about the EMT responses? What's the time frame? Who on the staff, has been allergen trained? And he said every single one of the security members on my team has been trained on how to administer epinephrine, and we have epinephrine on site. And my catering manager's like, you just made her day. I was like, what? I mean, because I was just expecting him to answer that the EMT, and because I was like, how long does it take him to get there? And who on the EMT staff has it? And he's like, no, we've been trained. And we have them on site. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it was really amazing.
That's
I was
so
very
important. Happy. Yeah. It's like, just like for any other health, ailment, like trying to have that training of first aid or whatever it is, like the more people who know how to administer epinephrine, the better. It could help them, if they develop a food allergy suddenly, it could help someone else if they're around them. It really saves lives when people are trained in how to use epinephrine. And so that is wonderful to hear. I might have to find out more about that space from you later.
Yeah, I definitely will let you know. Okay, so there's a question that I asked you before we got on, and it was if you had a negative example of something, and it was you had emailed a restaurant and asked about peanuts, and then you saw that peanut butter was on the menu. It reminds me of the story in Texas of the young man who asked 3 times. And the gentleman, his mom found out after he passed away that the secret sauce contained peanut butter. But when he was asking about, the owner said, well, he was asking about peanuts, not peanut butter.
Not peanut butter, right. Not peanut oil, not peanut butter, not peanut garnish, right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Peanuts are made from peanut butter.
Yeah. It's kind of surprising.
Or peanut butter is made from peanuts.
Yeah. Right. It's all the same. Like peanuts are, peanut butter is made out of crushed peanuts. Peanut oil comes from peanuts. Right. Yeah. It's like, that is unfortunately a conversation I've had many times where I've, asked, well, what's in your mole sauce? And they're like, well, peanut butter. And I'm like, well, I just asked if you had peanuts in the kitchen and you said no. And so, it's not that I'm holding that over them, but I'm like, okay, just so you know, I'm trying to educate them. Like it could be in something like a sauce. It could be in a smoothie it could be in anything. And so I do ask a lot of questions around that, but I don't always care, cover all of it, and they might not either when getting back to me. But yeah, that did happen to me when I was traveling, and I emailed a number of times with them. They assured me, oh, you're going to have a great experience. We don't use anything with peanuts. And I got in, I ordered, and I was sitting looking at the menu, and I noticed peanut butter on one of the desserts. And I was like, and so I left and I called them, and it was a whole thing, because then it looked like I dined and dashed or whatever.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm not going in there. I ordered this food, but I don't need it. I'll pay for it. But this is what happened. I showed them the emails. Like, I have been reassured that there's no peanuts. And they said, oh, it was on a whim. One of the staff decided to change the menu that day.
Right.
So that's what happened.
And oh, wow. And so that's more of a scratch kitchen that can change the menu for the day and do that versus a chain restaurant that menus are pretty standard as well. So
Yeah. And I didn't realize that it was like that. When I had talked to them, they had said like, we've never used peanuts since, and they even had like a specific year. They were like, we haven't used it since, this year. And so it was a total fluke. And it was not a chain restaurant, like a chain, but it was a chain restaurant owned, I think it was like 6 locations around different cities. It may have been like franchised or something like that. So they did have, apparently they had the ability to just change the dessert menu.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we're at 45 minutes. Holy moly. Okay. So what is a best practice that you do when you're traveling or when you're going out to restaurants that you really suggest for other people with food allergies and for maybe restaurants to ask, hey, do you have, for restaurants to understand?
Yeah, well, I would say definitely best practice. I like emailing, even though, like I just gave an example, it doesn't always go according to plan. But I like
Right.
getting it in writing. I think it's gotten me better results than just talking to someone over the phone who could be like, yeah. Over email, they're having to type out like, yes, we have it in this and we don't have it in this. And so I feel like I get a lot more detail over email with people. And then I also, when I travel, wear a bracelet that is like a medical alert ID. So it has my peanut allergy, and that gives me a lot of peace of mind. It says on the back of it, it's engraved, I have epinephrine in my purse at all times. So there's small things like that, just wearing an ID bracelet if I'm alone and traveling, or, go to the bathroom and someone isn't with me and I have a reaction, there is a chance that someone will see that bracelet.
Okay, no, that's a great idea. And that video I saw, well, it was actually for somebody who has diabetes, but just really making that bracelet look like part of your normal everyday wear, but it does communicate your needs. So I think that's really cool to do. Okay, so what do you wish people knew about what you do, your advocacy, your awareness, things like that?
Yeah, I wish people, I think people do know this sometimes, but it's not a business for me in terms of making a profit or anything like that. This is fully, not that that's a problem, but it's fully like I work full time doing other things. I have other hobbies. This is just my life. I am raising awareness because it's something I'm passionate about. And at the end of the day, I want it done for me. I want it done for people I know and care about. I want it done for everybody. And so if lives can be saved due to my advocacy work about labeling laws or just raising awareness, how to use epinephrine, any of those things that I talk about on my website, then I've done my job with my advocacy. So this is just my life, and some insight into it really is what my blog is.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, and one final question that I ask everybody: what does a safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experience look like to you?
I'd say transparency, just being willing to have conversations with people and hear them out, and being honest. If it's not going to work, it's okay. It's better to not try to make it work if it's not going to fit with the accommodations for the person. So I think honesty and just transparency.
That's really that's key. I mean, just like you said, you're not trying to go after them. You're not trying to,
No.
Point fingers at them. And I think a lot of in your approach across the board from what I've seen and heard today is just it's really education. And
Definitely.
yeah. Okay, Zöe, thank you so much for joining me. And how can everybody get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tracy. This has been a blast. I'm on Instagram, Invisibly Allergic. I'm on Facebook, Invisibly Allergic. My LinkedIn is linked. And then, my website, which is www.invisiblyallergic.com. I have a contact page if anyone ever wants to send me an email. So I'm happy to talk anytime.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate all your advocacy work. And I'm going to connect you with some people because
Please do.
it's important to get more of us together you know, and I think that really happened with the, well, we didn't talk about it, but the Uber Eats ad, really the
Yes.
community came together and got that Uber Eats ad changed before the Super Bowl. And that a small group made a big change.
Made a big change
So,
that
yeah.
saved lives ultimately. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, it didn't spread
Exactly.
misinformation. So yeah,
Right.
thank you. I would love to be connected, and I really appreciate all you
Yeah.
do. And thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Everyone, stay safe and eat well until next week. We kick off with Women's History Month or Herstory Month. So I will be highlighting some women that are doing some really cool things besides Zoe. She could be one of them as well. Doing really wonderful things in food and beverage as it relates to sustainability, accessibility, and inclusion. So thank you, everybody. Stay safe and eat well.